Bruxelles, je t'aime. Tu m'avais manqué. Bruxelles, je t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime. T'es ma préférée. Bruxelles, je t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime.
Hello and welcome to Bruxelles, je t'aime, Euronews' talk show all about the European capital of Brussels. On Brussels, my love, we break down some of the big stories of the week, examine what's at stake for you and for Europe. My name is Maeve McMahon. Thank you so much for joining us. Coming up this week, over 365 days have passed since Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine. To mark the occasion, US President Joe Biden visited Kiev, giving a morale boost to the country. 1 year since the invasion, we're picking apart EU sanctions, checking if they're really stopping the perpetrators and looking at how the lives of ordinary Ukrainians and Russians who do not support the war have been turned upside down. And 8 million, the number of Ukrainian refugees now residing within Europe. Almost 5 million registered for the Temporary Protection Scheme, an EU plan to protect those fleeing war that was used for the first time in history last year. A year on, we're asking if the programme is a success story or not, if Ukrainians have settled in, and if Europeans are still so welcoming. To talk about these topics and more, I'm joined here in our studio by Dharmendra Kanani, Director of Strategy at Friends of Europe. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
We're also joined by Natalia Arnaud, from the President, in fact, of the Free Russia Foundation, and Ricardo Borges de Castro, Associate Director at the European Policy Centre.
Hi, good to see you.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Good to be here.
So a bit of a reflective moment in Brussels here this week, 1 year on since that invasion began. What is your assessment? Dharmendra, we'll start with you.
I think one of the biggest issues for us is the fact that we thought it would never happen. We didn't think it would last this long, and we didn't expect the alliance, the global alliance, NATO alliance, to work in the way that it did. And we've seen the largest coming together of communities and economies, creating the biggest sanctions on the largest economy, one of the largest economies in the world. We've seen this influx of millions of people into Europe, and we've seen a different response, if you like, to Ukrainian refugees and asylum seekers, to what we had before for Syria and elsewhere. You're seeing, a whole new, populations of, if you might call it new Europeans, Ukrainians in Europe. And I think the biggest issue for us, one of the things that we are really keen to ensure is that to not normalise the war. I think one of the issues for all of us is that it'll soon fritter into something which is a dispute that will continue. The media will move on, and things will just carry on assuming as if there's a new normal, a new conflict. We mustn't allow that. So one of the things that we're doing is creating a campaign that's launched today around do not normalise the war. And the reason for that, though, is that actually let's not forget what it's done to our sense of energy security, food poverty, etc. and so forth. So I think what it's made us think about, my biggest assessment is the kind of relationships we've created for supply chains globally. And actually it's a wake-up call to big nations to say, stop doing business with illiberal economies.
Stop doing business with illiberal economies. Okay, a very comprehensive answer there from Dharmendra. What about you, Ricardo?
Well, I mean, if I would highlight 2 points, and also following up on what Dharmendra just said. I mean, the first one is really the incredible resistance of the Ukrainian people. I think 360 days after, in a war that people thought that would last, a week or a few days, it has been going on for 365 days with immense sacrifice for Ukrainians. So I think they are paying the highest price in this war. But following up a little bit on what Dharmendra was saying, I believe that the key question that I have in going forward is that how long will this unity among Western allies will last? How long, the EU unity will last to maintain an effort? And probably I will use this expression many times today. This is a marathon. This is a long, long run that we have ahead of us, and we need to be prepared for that.
Okay. You mentioned the resilience of the Ukrainian people. Natalia Arnaud, you're the president of the Free Russia Foundation. What about the perspective of the Russians, those Russians like yourself who do not support the war of Vladimir Putin, the Russian president?
Well, what happened a year ago for us, pro-democracy Russians, is the worst possible scenario, the worst possible nightmare. It's absolutely terrible. And also what we are striving for and what we understand that just some kind of a ceasefire or truce, temporal truce, won't be a solution. For us, victory is an absolute and total victory of Ukraine, an absolute and total defeat of Putin's regime, and eventually regime change in Russia. I think Putin's regime underestimated bravery of Ukrainians, as the entire world underestimated how brave and courageous each and every Ukrainian is, from the leadership to just simple people fighting for their homeland. But also, what is important for us, that the world sees efforts of pro-democracy Russians. There are a lot of them. It's not true that Russians don't protest. There are a lot of Russians who were detained for their anti-war position. The repressions are huge in Russia now. Even you can be in jail for 15 years just to say the word "the war." And there are so many Russians behind the bars. Many of our friends, those who are like, there is a very well-known Russian non-profit that tracks the political persecution in Russia. According to them, since full-scale invasion, there were only 18 days when no Russian was detained for the entire war protest in Russia. Somewhere, someplace, Russians do it. Derail trains, set conscription centers on fire, cut television cables, propaganda television cables, and so on. And plus, a lot of Russians, there was a huge exodus of Russians from the country, and they are now in exile, and also many of them are still fighting for a free and democratic Russia.
Okay.
We understand
let's
that...
just bring in...
Yes,
That's very interesting, your perspective. And I just want to go back to a point that Dharmendra made earlier, that you don't want the media forgetting about this conflict and just pushing it out of their minds. And we've actually been out on the streets of Brussels here asking people whether or not they care, whether this topic is still keeping them up at night. You can take a listen.
Yeah, I still care about the war in Ukraine.
Yes, I do, because it actually concern to all of us.
Yes, because it's humanity and it's wrong what's happening there.
Yeah, of course. I live in China, and I see there that there is a very big biased thinking about the war in Ukraine. It divides the world.
I started caring about like 6 months ago when it started a lot, but now I'm off news.
Yes, I do care about the war in Ukraine. I watch the news because my family is there, my mother, my grandparents. Honestly, it's breaking my heart what's happening there. I want to thank the West for what they're doing for Ukraine. Without you guys, we wouldn't be here.
Ricardo, quick reaction there?
I mean, I think this is clear that for us Europeans, this is an existential problem. And so that's why I believe that we need also to have this long-term perspective on what we are facing. This is a threat to our way of life, to how Europeans have organized our security, the way that we live. And I believe that this is really, we need to keep also the media interested. And I think the media is interested. I think if we look back, I mean, the fact that Ukraine and the war is still, part of most news. I mean, at least the news channels that I listen, either in Portuguese or French or English, it's everywhere. And so I think the fact that the war has not disappeared from our screens and also of our newspaper. I mean, I understand that there are, in some places it's okay. It's not already it's not the first item of news. Other things have happened in the world as well. And I think this is also important that us Europeans understand there are other problems around the world happening that we need to take care of them.
But you're absolutely right. It's not just Putin's Russia war against Ukraine. It's the war of the dictatorship against the democratic world. Putin, this is what he's selling to the Russian population, that it's not that Ukrainians we are fighting with NATO. NATO is, again, a lot of European countries are in NATO. So what Putin is doing is fighting the entire democratic world, the entire democratic stability.
I get what both of you are saying, but there are millions of people in Europe and elsewhere who are making a decision between eating or heating. Mm-hmm. Their money is not running for the week, and the level of people who are becoming homeless because they can't afford their mortgages anymore is increasing. So whilst unemployment is like fantastically low in Europe, we're forgetting what's happening below the surface. And let's not forget what's happened in Italy with the votes in terms of the shift to the right and populism. So we can have this conversation, which is great, about the fact that it's important, and you've seen the people saying in that little bubble that it's important, but actually ordinary people across Europe are thinking, what's going to happen to my future? And then you've got let's say the centre right or the populists preying on that mentality of need and being left out. And that's the biggest thing that we need to think about.
Because the big question is, are Europeans paying more than Russians for this war? And we've actually been taking a look at the figures of how much this has cost, in fact, to Europe. And it seems that financial support to Kiev has been 30 billion already spent, 18 billion allocated in 2023. We understand the invasion could lower EU GDP growth by up to 1.5% over 2022 and 2023. But the good news, energy dependence on Russia dropped from 36% to 9.7%. So Ricardo, I'd like to ask you, are they working, you think?
I think they are working. Again, I think we need to look at the long term. I don't think that if the sanctions were just a quick fix, they will be utilized all the time for any type of conflict. So I think, the sanctions are something that is there as an effort that is multi-sectoral to try to punish Russia's behavior and Mr. Putin's behavior. Because sometimes then I ask myself, when we have this debate about sanctions, then what was the alternative? What would we do? Would we just sit around as we did when this happened in Crimea and the east of Turkey in 2014? Okay, there were sanctions already put there, but we really didn't take it seriously.
And Natalia, just from the Russian perspective, are Russians back in your home country, are they feeling the pain, the impact of these sanctions?
They do, of course. Every day Russians live worse and worse. But of course, what we have in Russia is a huge zombifying propaganda saying that everything is fine. The entire world is trying to break down Russia, to destroy Russia, to dissolve Russia and all that. And of course, for that, many people are brainwashed and ready to suffer. What is absolutely right, sanctions do work. We do need to have patience because longer term impact of sanctions, we need to wait a little bit. Of course, the Kremlin is very skillful in finding alternative ways and finding different, in many countries are happy to help Kremlin to circumvent the sanctions. What we are asking for is that sanctions are good. We should, of course, increase the level of sanctions, but this year should be the year of implementation, of enforcing them.
And that's what we're hearing in Brussels this week at a number of briefings here in this city. A lot of diplomats saying this year will all be about sanction circumvention. And in fact, the EU has appointed a special envoy, David O'Sullivan, in order to implement those sanctions. Just regarding the Russian economy, we were speaking earlier this week to Kristina Georgieva, that is the head of the International Monetary Fund. She was, of course, over in Kiev, sitting down with President Zelensky, offering or discussing the details of that multi-billion-dollar programme for Ukraine. But we also had a chance to speak to her after that trip and ask her specifically about how the Russian economy has been impacted. Take a listen.
The biggest impact comes from the war itself. It has harmed the world economy. It has harmed the Russian economy as well. We have seen the use of policy space, of capacity of the state to buffer the sanctions in action. We also have seen Russia moving export of oil, particularly oil, to new destinations. But Russia is going to see possibly a loss of up to 9% of GDP between now and 2027 as a consequence of the war.
Kristina Georgieva there, the head of the IMF, Dharmendra.
I think Kristina, her job is to look at the trends and look ahead, but also the short term. And she's right in what she's saying. The reality is, all the forecasters got it wrong. They thought the sanctions would create a reduction of, let's say, 12 to 15%, hit to the economy. It's 1.2. Russia's surviving this and is resilient. The issue here that we're not talking about is that not only not normalizing this, but realizing there is a global chess game taking place here between liberal democracies and menacing rogue nations. So Russia's going to make the most of this. It is playing games with China, the Middle East, and you can see what's happening in terms of its support in Turkey and Syria. So it's playing the game that's really clever about, actually, I'm going to turn on and turn off my supply. I'll go to illiberal places so that I can survive. And NATO and the others are going to have to, I'm sure they're being smart. I'm sure they're looking at what they can do. But the reality is, this is a political maneuvering, menacing game between someone who is really focused about, I want to win this, I know how the world works, and I know where the dirty players are, and I'll work with them. So we need to be mindful of that in terms of the fact that sanctions are having an impact. They're not having the bite that they should have. So we need to think about upping the game. Not yet, but that's the issue. Therefore, we're assuming this is a long-term war. Yeah. If we normalise it, it's a long-term war. If we don't normalise it, we take a different approach to saying, actually, hit hard, short-term, and get things moving.
Exactly. So is this the European Union being naive again on the world stage here?
I don't know if it's being naive. What is not being is as effective as it could be. I mean, we should also not forget that since the war started, Europeans have bought 139 billion euros of Russian fossil fuels, mostly oil. So I mean, we also can't forget these realities still. So there I agree. I mean, it should have been much harder. I mean, the longer this war lasts, the more costly it will be, also in lives and destruction and all of this. So I mean, I understand that if you are a political leader, if you are the prime minister of a nation, you also need to understand the risks that you are taking. But what is the bigger risk here? Is that, as Natalia was saying, is that Ukraine wins or is that Russia wins? I mean, we need really to look at this from this longer term perspective and the effect that this will have. I mean, we were going to be dealing with this problem for the foreseeable future, for the next decade at least, in terms of dealing with Russia, either a free and democratic Russia. Anything that will happen will have an impact on us Europeans.
History teaches us that all dictatorships eventually fall, all dictators are mortal, and of course, right now, when Putin attacked Ukraine as he did last year with full-scale invasion, he just expedited his expiration date. He's already outdated. He has a lot of problems inside Russia, and everybody now, of course, we understand, trying to find some bullets, some silver bullets, some fast solutions. There is no fast solution. There are a lot of combinations of pressure that we had to apply to this very strong regime, but this weakening international pressure, keep supporting Ukraine with everything they are asking for, keep increasing sanctions, keep enforcing those sanctions, but also keep supporting Russian pro-democracy forces and independent media so that they become the real second front.
Okay. I don't know if you were watching the speech this week of Vladimir Putin. He gave an address to the nation while Joe Biden, the President of the United States, made a surprise visit over to Kiev. We saw as well Vladimir Putin, the President, speaking to the nation there and very much blaming the West and blaming Kiev for this, pretty much saying that he has absolutely no responsibility for this. Are people really believing that, Natalia?
Well, because it's it's embarrassing for Putin to lose to Ukraine. It's much better to say that our enemy is bigger. It's the entire democratic world. It's the NATO. It's the US and the European Union. And of course, he's trying to elevate it, and so again, try to rally Russians around his propaganda that we are going to be destroyed if I'm your only solution, but which is not true, of course.
And thousands of companies have left Russia since the invasion began. I was looking at data from Zara, 502 stores closed down. A number of other companies have left. Are people, is this having an impact, do you think?
In terms of the local economy, I think it obviously is. But again, it's smart working. What he's doing is replacing those that have left with state-owned infrastructure and say, actually, we'll put in a McDonald's, we'll put in a Zara, but we'll call it something else. And it's very quick to do that. What we don't know, because of the media shutdown, right, we don't know what's happening to Russians, everyday Russians all over. We're not just talking about Moscow and St. Petersburg, we're talking about the heartland. You don't have access to that. We don't have access to that in terms of knowing that actually people are going to be turning at some point. When you listen to the speech from Putin, it's the ghost of your past. It's like Hitler as elements of dictators. It's almost like a finely messaged, oratory and rhetoric that was chilling, I thought. But you have to say...
And Ricardo, brief... Yeah.
I mean, I just wanted to pick up on a point, is that we also don't have today as much information about Russia, and even in numbers in terms of the economy of what's going on, because now there's less access to this information because it's also not published. So we really don't know some of the things that are happening. But just to give a concrete example, in 2022, Russia had the biggest increase of child poverty in the world, or at least in that part of Europe. So, I mean, things are happening there.
And it's underreported. Where are you getting your information, and how are your friends over in
Russia?
This was UNICEF.
We have networks inside Russia. We have a lot of, those who are in exile working on Russia a lot, trying to change public opinion and so on. When we tell about the situation in any democratic country, we have a lot of democratic instruments to measure the condition of the society. We have freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, of association, free and fair elections. If somebody doesn't like somebody, it can be voted out. And also independent polls. We don't have anything in Russia at the moment. There are a lot of people who are telling these polls and poll numbers, which I really beg for you not to listen to, because in a totalitarian regime you cannot even, you should understand that there is no independent sociology. And many, even those like Levada Center, very well-respected polling agency, what they don't publish is the response rate. So they have to find 3 or 4% of people actually agree to answer. So when they say 70% support, it's only of those who are not afraid to say we are supporting.
So just very briefly, how are your friends over there?
Yes, a lot of friends are in jails now, and of course it's also underreported because independent media left the country. Very often we learn about protests inside Russia only when some human rights lawyer starts defending in some criminal case, and then from criminal case materials we only understand that this or that happened inside Russia. For example, Russia is now on the second or third country in the world for installing VPNs, because all the, everything is blocked, all social media, everything else.
I'm going to have to stop you there, Natalia. Thank you so much for that. Thank you, Dharmendra, and thank you, Ricardo. And thank you for watching. But don't go anywhere, because after the break, we'll be hearing if Ukrainian refugees are hoping to stay in Europe or if they're counting their days to go home. See you soon here on Euronews and euronews.com. Welcome back to Brussels, my love, with me, Maeve McMahon, where we're taking a look back at some of the big stories of the week. Well, just under a year ago, the European Union initiated the so-called Temporary Protection Directive. It was for the very first time and meant that all those fleeing the war in Ukraine could, in theory, work and have access to healthcare and benefits. Our Italian reporter, Vincenzo Genovese, was asking the EU Commissioner for Migration earlier this week how she was addressing all the challenges, though, around housing, access to language courses and jobs. We can take a listen now to Ylva Johansson.
Of course, we have a lot of challenges. I mean, we are hosting 4 million Ukrainian refugees. This is really a huge challenge, of course, for the whole Europe, and especially for those member states that are most affected, like Czech Republic, Estonia, Poland, but also Germany. We have already more than 600,000 Ukrainians working. We have another 400,000 that are registered in the public employment service. Approximately half of the refugees in working age are more or less on the labour market. That's not so bad, but of course we need to do more.
So I guess a question to you all, has this been a success story? I'll start with you, Ricardo.
I think it's been important that the EU has given this signal to welcome refugees. As you were saying in your introduction, there are now 8 million refugees or Ukrainian refugees in Europe. And according to the EU, these are UN agency numbers, there's 5.4 million internally displaced Ukrainians in the country. This is 13.5 million, 13.4 million. This would be the 8th biggest European Union country if it were a country.
The Commissioner there very much praising the programme, saying it's working, but on the ground we're seeing problems, we're seeing tensions, we're seeing serious issues.
You're gonna get a lot of that. Come on, with the shock of such a large number of people coming in at one point within weeks and a month. That's going to have an impact on systems locally and nationally. And we know from COVID that our national and local systems aren't that resilient to deal with shocks and crises. But really what's interesting about this, and I mean that in the most philosophical but also political ways, that a directive was created for the first time in this way, which we haven't seen historically for other communities of asylum seekers and refugees. And I'm not saying that this is wrong, but learn from this. Mm-hmm. Use that directive creatively in the future so that it becomes something which we can be proud of in Europe as actually being, human rights and value-based, but don't just be selective about the communities you choose to use it for. But it's actually, what I'm saying is, we housed some in my family in Spain. We had a range of families, but the biggest message was people want to go back, and they want to be reconnected. And my final point is that we're forgetting this is a story of women and children who have been separated from their communities. This is the largest exodus of women from a nation across into Europe. And I think the thing that for Europe and for Ukraine will be, how do you make sense of community when the women that were holding the local economy and the local community together are no longer there? And I think that's a big crisis both within Europe but also Ukraine.
And you need resources, of course, to deal with that. The psychological stain on people.
We are very thankful for all countries and all people who are helping Ukrainians, and I think it's if you're on the side of the good, if you are a decent person or a country, you should be helping Ukraine, who is fighting on the front lines with this existential threat, a dictatorship that is already at the doorstep here of the democratic world. And also, we shouldn't forget all of us who had to flee our countries. Ukrainians had to get evacuated. A lot of Belarusians and Russians, they had to flee from dictatorships of Putin and Lukashenko. We want to be back home. This is
You're homesick. Everyone loves their home, right?
We want to be back, yes. This is what we are striving for. And also we shouldn't forget about also those displaced Ukrainians who are being forcefully deported to Russia, and a lot of children.
3 million, I believe.
Yes,
3 million. Dharmendra, you mentioned there the fact that the majority were women who fled to Europe. In fact, according to Eurostat, it was 65%, I believe, of Ukrainian refugees who availed of this scheme who were female. And one of them is the 30-year-old Alia. She comes originally from Donetsk. And I met her last year on the Ukrainian-Hungarian border when she had just arrived here with her cat. Now she's based in Berlin, learning German every single day so she can get a good job. I spoke to her yesterday. Take a look.
Hello, my name is Oля. I'm from Ukraine. I left Ukraine 1 year ago. I found a lot of new friends. My life very changed. I don't know when I can meet my family as I now in the occupation territory Ukraine. I think maybe 6 months in Germany. I was in depression, but now I'm okay. And now I feel happy. And after I want a walk.
So Alia there speaking to us.
It really resonates with me because 10 years ago when I had to flee my home country, I also took my cat, my Moscow cat with me. It was 19 years old. It died last April, but it was really important to take my pet with me. Since this full-scale invasion, our organization, Free Russia Foundation, we were evacuating a lot of Ukrainians, but also all these Russian and Belarusian activists who fled to Ukraine prior to this full-scale invasion. So thousands and thousands, but we also evacuated over 100 cats, 100 dogs, 3 snails.
It was astonishing, really, the amount of pets that were taken. But what about the future of these millions of Ukrainians that are here in the European Union on territory? Many want to go home, but could they one day be European citizens when Ukraine one day joins the European Union? Just very briefly, Ricardo.
Yeah, well, I do hope so. I think they are European. I think that the signal that was also given by the EU of naming the country a candidate country, I think it's really the right direction. I think it sends the political signal of where Ukrainians belong. And I think, again, it will be probably another marathon, a long game, but still it is the right one to do, because in the end, that's where they belong. And I think Europeans do understand first that the EU support for Ukraine has been correct. 74% of them believe that it's true.
Okay.
66 believe that Ukraine, when it meets the criteria, should become a member of the EU.
And Dharmendra, what do you think? Because the EU often tends to overpromise sometimes and then underdeliver.
On this occasion, I go back to my earlier point, which was that this is one of the best examples of the EU working to support and create the mechanisms and the infrastructure for war refugees in a way that we've never seen before, or also on a scale. And I think the narrative has been different. So when you think about 1 million people in Germany, some Germans will feel that actually, God, they've given us, that we're saved because we've got major holes in our economy in terms of unemployment. So therefore, this, talented, English-speaking Ukrainians walk in and are able to get jobs. And we've got that story across Europe. Mm-hmm. But I think there's a bigger question here about what Europe wants to be in the next 10 years. Mm-hmm. And learning from this is that actually playing silly buggers with illiberal democracies on supply chains, overlooking the Balkans and thinking, actually, what are we doing? Get a grip and become bigger and stronger.
Get a grip and become bigger. I'm afraid that is all we have time for. I hope that message was loud and clear. Thank you so much to you all for being with us, and thank you for watching. We'll see you soon here on Euronews and euronews.com. Welcome back to Brussels, my love, with me, Maeve McMahon, where we're taking a little look back at some of the European stories that caught our attention this week. Well, here at Euronews, as you know, we get spammed with press releases and communications from various organisations. But this week, one that caught our eye was from the World Health Organization. It says that increasing physical activity could prevent thousands of premature deaths in the EU and save billions of euros in healthcare spending annually. Would you all agree?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. Natalie?
Yes. Yes, it's a good way to distress.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a runner, so for me, this is like a no-brainer. It's,
So you've got the good endorphins.
The issue here is not us, I have to say, with due respect.
Yeah.
The issue is that a lot of women, people on poor incomes, in poor housing, with not the kind of spaces that we take for granted who don't exercise. They're the ones at the sharp edge of this. They're the ones in the older communities who are getting non-communicable disease like heart disease, etc. That's the issue. If we had a different culture of encouraging exercise from birth to death, if you did that cycle, and seeing it as a natural point rather than medicating communities, because of the volume of problems we have in the healthcare system, we are easier and much more easy to just prescribe drugs, de-stress with loads of tablets, but don't go exercising. And if we had a different culture or mentality, we'd save billions.
I'm just going to pause there because I'd like to take a look at the situation across Europe and the various countries where, according to Eurobarometer, never do any exercise. And right up on top there at 73% is your home country, Ricardo.
I'm an outlier.
Portugal, then Greece, then Poland. You are indeed in the minority. And then the most is Finland, Sweden and Denmark. But I understand, Ricardo, the reason for that is access to recreational space, which is something that you mentioned there. So it's not just that Portuguese people don't want to do sport; they can't. They argue.
I think in many places they can't, and I think I think it has changed a lot. Most, at least from what I remember from my country, or every time I go there, there's more and more places where people can exercise. But as Narendra was just saying, it's probably not in all of the places that it should be, and rapidly accessible to those that can't afford to go to a gym or can't afford a pair of sneakers to go for a run. So I think there is an incentive also. I think there is an issue of education, getting people to move. I think it's very important because, as you were saying, half of Europeans don't exercise at all. So it's really important that we pass across this message, because of course this then will have. It's not only cardiovascular diseases; it's mental health issues.
It should become very trendy.
Exactly.
It should become popular, and then everybody would be doing it. You don't need anything to just make steps or walk with your dog or things like that.
But Natalia, you don't have time, I'm sure, either to do sport. You've been traveling across Europe the last couple of weeks as well with your movement.
I'm a lot on planes, but even there you can exercise, you can do yoga, you can do a lot of things in your hotel rooms, for example. Yeah, it's just if you want to do it, you will do it. My grandmother learned how to swim in '86. When people tell me that they cannot learn something because they are too old or something or cannot do it, I say no. It's you can do it at any age.
That is very inspiring.
But if you grow up in a community where it isn't natural and normal and it's not encouraged, you're not going to do it. And I think gym membership is not an issue. When you see the innovations in Brussels and elsewhere, open garden, in urban space gyms where you've got all the kit, people can do it. And I think if kids can see their families doing that, it becomes a norm. And that's the important thing. And I think the other thing is about the fact that simple messages like 30 minutes a day if you go for a walk, that's all you need to keep yourself a little bit fit and healthy.
Yes. Because gyms are laughing their way to the bank. They are making up so much money from membership that people don't even go. And on that note of walking, there's a movement in my home country, which is Ireland, to get people walking 10,000 steps a day.
That's right.
I challenge you all, and I challenge our viewers to do that. Would that be something you might? Well, you don't need to if you're a jogger.
I will, but I'll also challenge everybody to come and run the Brussels 20K. It's going to be in May, so I think that's a good occasion for people to start as well.
I have done that before, and I loved it. Would you do that?
I'm already doing 10,000 steps a day, but I always like to push myself. So next time it's 12,000 and 15. So just increasing them.
I'm a laggard, I'm afraid. I think it's a great thing to do. I'd like to walk, but I won't be doing a marathon. I don't do jogging. But I think that, for me, you should actually be... I stand up to the fact that I will try and make sure I walk as much as I can. And I will make sure I do 30 minutes because I know that little bit of circulation in your body will prevent stuff.
Okay, Narendra, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Natalia, thank you so much for being with us. Ricardo, thank you to you as well.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. Take care, and we'll see you very soon, hopefully, on Euronews and euronews.com.